right, I'm going to call to order the Fire Code Board of Appeals meeting for today, January 27th, 2020. Let's start with roll call, please.
Miller.
Here.
Becken.
Here.
And Verplank.
Here.
Just a quick reminder to silent cell phones. Approval of agenda. I get a motion to approve today's agenda.
I move we approve today's agenda.
I support.
All right, all those in favor of approving the agenda, please say aye. Yes. Any opposed? Okay, how about approval of minutes for December 6, 2019? Can I get a motion to approve those minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of December 6th, 2019.
Second.
Any discussion on the minutes? Okay, all those in favor of approving the minutes, say yes.
Yes.
Anyone opposed? No. Okay. We have no unfinished business, so new business, since this is the first meeting of the calendar year, we have to elect a chair and a vice chair. So can I get a nomination for chair?
I move we approve. I move that Aaron Miller be reappointed as chair of this commission.
I'll support.
Any discussion? Okay. All those in favor of electing Aaron Miller as chair, say yes.
Yes.
How about a nomination for vice chair?
I move we approve. Sustaining vice chair Eric Beckman.
I'll second that. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor of re-electing Eric Beckman as vice chair, say yes.
Yes.
Okay, so next we'll move into the public hearing to consider the appeal of North Shores of Saugatuck. The way this will go is that I'll open it quickly and then we'll have a 20-minute presentation by the applicant or their designee, followed by a 20-minute presentation from the fire code official or their designee. We'll then open it up for public comment. We will limit each of those parties to 5 minutes for public comment after the presentations. Then we'll move into discussion by the board. We'll close the hearing, then we'll move into action by the board, and follow that up with public comments at the end. I will ask during the presentations for the board to hold questions until the discussion part, just to make sure that each presenter gets their 20 minutes to present without interruption from questions. So, okay. With that, I will open it up for presentation by the applicant or the designee.
Thank you, Chairman Miller. Carl Gabriels on behalf of the applicant, North Shore, the owner of Lot 15 in this case. As indicated in our application for appeal, North Shore is basing its appeal of the Fire Chief Site Plan Review on all three of the grounds that are set forth by the Saugatuck Township Ordinance. You're acting under the authority delegated to you by that ordinance, and it's the ordinance that sets forth and guides this discussion and describes the scope. And so that's where I want to start today. Looking on the screen, this is where you guys, this body is born. There's a Board of Appeals that's set up to decide appeals of orders, decisions, and determinations made by the Fire Code relative in this township. Your role is simply not to defer to any decisions made. You are to review, and based on your expertise and training, you're to independently evaluate these matters yourselves. Now, in the ordinance, there's also 3 specific grounds on which an appellant can base their appeal, and subsequently on which you as the board are authorized to reverse or review or modify a decision from the district. And those 3 are a claim that the intent of this code of the rules legally adopted hereunder have been incorrectly interpreted. Another one is the provisions of this code do not fully apply. Or third, an equivalent method of protection and safety is proposed. Those are all 3 set forth in the Saugatuck Township Ordinance. Now, in reviewing the fire chief's decisions, again, the ordinance says that this is based on your qualifications, your experience. Here is specifically what the ordinance says about this board and everyone that is on it. The Board of Appeals shall consist of members who are qualified by experience and training to pass on matters pertaining to hazards of fire, explosions, hazardous conditions, or fire protection systems. So North Shore is specifically relying on the three of your expertise to independently evaluate this matter, and afterwards, we're going to ask you to make two findings of fact. First, we're going to ask you to find that NFPA 1142 should be applied to Lot 15. With approximately 150 persons per square mile, Saugatuck Township is a rural area, and Lot 15 is not served by a municipal water supply system. Okay? After that finding, the second one follows. We're asking you to find that the existing dry hydrants located near Lot 15 constitute an acceptable alternative water supply under NFPA 1142, capable of providing sufficient water flow, in this case, the 500 gallons per minute, to fight a potential fire in the residential home proposed on Lot 15. Those are the two findings we're asking you to make. The first one regards the application of NFPA 1142. Just to be clear, I think we all understand this, that the fire district and the fire chief are not free to simply apply any sort of standard that they want to. Remember, the fire chief, as well as this board, are operating pursuant to the authority delegated to it by the Saugatuck Township ordinance. Here's what the ordinance, so the ordinance adopts the fire code. The fire code then incorporates NFPA 1142. And so I want to walk through how we get to 1142 and why it's applicable. Here's what the ordinance says, that the International Fire Code, including all appendices, except for Appendix A, are adopted as the fire code of the township. And that part about the appendices is important because the most relevant, and I would dare say the almost only relevant section of the fire code that relates to the matters today is found in Appendix B, which says, for information regarding water supplies for firefighting purposes in rural and suburban areas in which an adequate and reliable supply system does not exist, the fire code official is authorized to utilize 1142. 1142 confirms that standard. This standard identifies a method for determining the minimum requirements for alternative water supplies for structural firefighting purposes in areas where the authority having jurisdiction, that's the chief, and then now you, as you're sitting on this appeal, determines that an adequate and reliable water supply system, sounds like that, looks like I have a typo there with an S on it, for firefighting do not otherwise exist. It goes on and says, in locations where adequate municipal type water systems are not provided and additional fire protection is needed, minimum water supplies shall be established in or transportable to the designated area. Note on those two slides in the NFPA, they talk about system, okay? Both of them talk about system, and the International Fire Code does as well. We'll get back to that in a second. Now, there should be no question that Saugatuck Township is rural or suburban as that is defined. NFPA gives us a definition. Less than 500 persons per square mile is rural. Less than 1,000 is suburban. And NFPA 1142 applies in both those situations. Vice Chair Beckman, as the rep from Saugatuck Township, I'm sure you can confirm that either yourself from personal knowledge or from contacting the officials at Saugatuck Township to confirm the population, that it's about 150 per square mile. Now, for whatever reason, the fire chief has indicated that he does not want NFPA 1142 to apply. So this is written in his letter that he just sent to you guys, right? National Fire Protection Association 1142 is not applicable as there is a water supply available, Lake Michigan and the Kalamazoo River. Are you noticing a word that's missing from that description that's highlighted that we just talked about? System. The Fire Code, International Fire Code, and NFPA talk about the decision on whether it's applicable or not, whether there's a municipal system, a water supply system, not a body of water. This is a misrepresentation of what the standard is. Here's a map of the township and the water supply. Not the whole township, but the relevant part. The arrow points to where Lot 15 is. Is it served by municipal water? No. Just to be clear, North Shore is not asking for the use of some second-rate standard dreamed up by some amateur and written on a napkin, okay? This is the standard articulated by the National Fire Protection Association. NFPA 1142 is in fact described as the standard on water supplies for suburban and rural firefighting. This isn't a second-rate standard. Everyone in the industry, absent this department, seems to realize that there's a difference in firefighting between the city and between a rural community. Once the proper standard is applied, it's fairly simple to conclude that the site plan submitted by North Shore should be approved and that the two primary reasons, water flow and location of water source, are inapplicable. Now, to start this determination, we have to start with figuring out how much water you need to fight a fire. This is in our materials. James Burnham writes, Rethinking Rural Water Supplies. He's a rural water firefighting expert. And he says this: you will find that for average-sized single-family dwellings, the required flow rate is 250 gallons per minute, and the total water supply needed is around 2,500 gallons. For larger dwellings, which this certainly is, the flow rate will generally be in the 500 gallon per minute range, and the total water required is 10,000 gallons or less. Mr. Burnham's estimates are perfectly in line with what NFPA 1142 requires. Mr. Burnham's estimates here in this article are perfectly in line with what 1142 specifically requires. When you look at a calculation under NFPA 1142, you start with the square footage of the house. Okay? That's converted then to a total volume of the house. From there you add three different classification numbers into the equation. The first is the occupancy hazard classification. In this case it's number 7 because it's a dwelling. The second is the construction classification. This is a number 1, not because of anything in particular, but because that's what NFPA 1142 says. It's 1. And the third is the exposure hazards classification, whether there's any structures within 50 feet. And there's not. So what's the result? Total gallons needed, 9,861 gallons. And 500 gallons per minute flow rate. Exactly what Mr. Burnham indicates in the article. Now, the gallons per minute at the bottom of 500 is that amount because the total gallons fit into this category, 2,500 through 9,999 gallons. Even assuming that we are off by over 200% in this calculation. If we're down here at over 20,000 total gallons required, what's the gallons per minute? 1,000. It's unclear where the fire chief gets his 2,000 gallon per minute demand. The review, if you've looked at it, doesn't provide an explanation. It just says it. And the letter sent to you a week ago, it doesn't have any explanation for it either. My guess is he's using some other standard, perhaps the Insurance Services Office, ISO standard. He's not an insurance underwriter. That's not his role. The township ordinance doesn't incorporate the ISO standard. The township ordinance incorporates the International Fire Code, which in turn points us to NFPA 1142 for rural areas. The true required water flow is 500 gallons per minute. Additionally, NFPA does not require fire hydrants every 400 feet as the fire chief demands in his review. NFPA 1142 says lots of things about dry hydrants, including a minimum distance that they can't be closer than 100 feet, I believe it is, from a structure. But it does not require them to be within 400 feet of every house. And it's clear, if you look at NFPA 1142 at its whole, that requirement of 400 feet does not come from NFPA 1142. Because look at how it describes how a fire department should do its problem solving to get water to a source of a scene of a fire in a rural area. One, it could be from supplies at or near the incident scene. Two, it can be from supplies transported to the scene. It can be by relaying water from a source to the fire scene using large diameter hose. None of those would be applicable if you have this baked-in requirement that the chief is advocating for of a 400 feet maximum distance. So what is North Shore proposing? How do we fight a fire here on Lot 15? The simplest method is to hook up to the dry hydrants that are less than 800 feet away. Our calculation, I think I had a 746. If you go by the road, the fire chief said it's 780, something like that. Less than 500 feet, we'll go with that. You hook up to the hydrants, the dry hydrants that are less than 800 feet away, and you pump it to the fire, and you address the situation there. James Burnham again says this, it's not very complicated. 4-inch hose can effectively deliver 1,000 gallons per minute through a 1,000-foot hose lay, or 500 gallons a minute through a 4,000-foot hose lay, using a single pumper at the source. So this isn't pumper after pumper after pumper in a relay sequence. This is one pumper by the dry hydrants, pumping water to a house that's less than 800 feet away. What number do we have to get? 500 gallons per minute. That's certainly less than the 4,000-foot hose lay. It's even less than the 1,000-foot hose lay that would allow us to get 1,000 gallons per minute. To conclude, North Shore is not asking this board to waive any specific requirements of the IFC or to apply any sort of second-rate standard. North Shore is simply asking this board to independently evaluate this matter using your expertise and training, and to treat Lot 15 like what it is, a residential home in a rural community that is not serviced by a municipal water supply. That is exactly what the ordinance describes, and that is exactly what the ordinance instructs and requires you to do. Unless you have any questions, that's all I have. I don't know if you're asking questions now or at the end.
We'll hold questions until discussion after the presentation.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just have the slides that I've,
These, oh, okay, that you just get.
thank you.
Thank you.
We'll get you one, we'll get you a copy too.
All right, thank you. So next we'll move into presentation by the fire code official or their designee.
You want to just leave your box here at the
Yeah.
Permission to start, Chair?
Yes, of course.
Okay. The community, the taxpayers, and the fire department have been placed in an untenable position with the North Shore's misguided safety requirements, resulting in increased risk to all stakeholders. However, we can offer a viable solution to the developer. To allow the situation to continue with this large-scale development conflicts with community risk reduction and is very unwise.
As you know, it is our mission to minimize community risks and improve the quality of life for all persons within the Saugatuck Township Fire District. So this is the reference property, North Shores of Saugatuck, or the overall site view. Lot 15 that we're talking about today, and it's important to mention that the two existing homes on Lot 6 and 7 have no approved fire protection water supplies. This was the site plan that was submitted that we reviewed. In total, the home equals about 6,300 square feet, including the garage. And then our overlay to show the site where it actually is in relation to the dry hydrants, about 800 feet apart. As indicated in our plan review, this plan review is only for Lot 15 and does not include any of the other reference lots or parcels in the North Shore development, and would be reviewed on a case-by-case basis if and when submitted.
We wanted to point out to the Board of Appeals that all this was brought to the attention to the developer's representative in 2017 in April. The fire flow requirements, the size of the homes that we were told were going to be built on the project, and that also in this letter, copy letter also references a static water supply, one that we pull the water out of the lake, was not recommended. There was also a note in that letter saying that your engineer should be consulted, and that a fire pump, private fire mains, would be the best way to do this, or an alternative to do this, and certainly provide a means of protection and 400 feet distance between the hydrants. That was pointed out in the letter. We even brought it to the owner himself, Mr. Jeff Padnos. Trustee Stacy Eldridge was there. Township Trustee John Helmrich was there, and myself, and we actually presented to Mr. Padnos our concerns, actually on the screen right here. He was very attentive, he listened, he saw that the distances we had, we were very concerned, and unfortunately Mr. Padnos told three of us that he had not seen the correspondence that we had written. What you see on the screen is a drawing of the standpipe. Actually, it's known as a dry hydrant. And you can see in detail, it might be a bit obscured there, but the real one that was submitted to us shows that it was 8 inch and then 6 inch, it was kind of altered. Clearly, if they were going to make a choice of offer dry hydrants, we said, well, if you're going to do that, they need to be 8 inch. However, we received this after 6 inch hydrants were installed. We wanted to point that out to you. We had not reviewed those. They were installed before we had approved them. So what you're seeing there is a test, a field test on site at North Shores, the actual dry hydrants in the water, 2 6-inch dry hydrants. What's important here is to let you know that to get the flow we needed at that site, not moving the water, but to get the flow that we determined we needed 4 lengths of hard suction. Our trucks only carry 2. They only carry 1,000 feet of LDH, and they only carry 2 hard suction lines. Also to point out to you, when we tested this, to pump the distances that we would need to go, we did a representation of that field test, about 260 pounds of pressure. And we ran for 3 hours. We couldn't run anymore because the problem was we were running out of fuel. So we stopped it after 3 hours. Here's something that you need to know. This is why fire service members should interpret codes and not others. A fire department connection, you can ask any firefighter in this room during public comment. Fire department connection is a signage for a sprinkler system on a building. It is not for this. Also, you'll see underneath you'll see standpipes. Technically, in any definition, a standpipe is a wet or dry pipe that's in a building. It's in a stairway. Again, that's why we review this and we approve it. We don't let others do it. You can clearly see the signs that indicate approved signage, and it does say dry hydrant. It doesn't anywhere say FDC or standpipes. Again, we did not approve this. When we get that drawing, we look at it, we review it, we compare it, then we send it to an engineer. What you see are comments by the fire district engineer, Fleeson Vandenbrink. You'll see from the slide, you'll see some things that he points out. For example, in our area, we don't have any dry hydrants that are in the lake or the river. They're in ponds. They aren't subjected to boat traffic or ice that they are in ponds. So he was concerned they should be stainless steel. He made some recommendations as far as what they should be like. He also mentioned the likely failure mode, which I brought up in the letter 2017. Zebra mussels, plastic bags, fish, ice chunks could easily block and take out that system. So his final thought with this whole comment on, there's a lots of potential failure for these types of devices. Why do we need an adequate approved water supply? Number one, people, men, women, children sleep in these houses. This isn't a storage building, it's not a business. 10 to 12 minute response times, lightweight construction, we've talked about that. Glue and sawdust. How about the high winds on the lakeshore? Everyone sees what's happening to the erosion on the lakeshore. Modern furnishings, it spells petroleum. All these things add up to a viable water supply. The next slide you're going to see another thing that contributes to why we want an approved water supply, an adequate supply, is the size of the houses. We're looking at well over 5,000 square feet. I heard a typical home is 2,500 square feet. Really? There's no suppression systems, there's no hydrants, there's no private service mains, no pumps, no way to distribute the water. You will have excessive hose lays that take a long time to put in.
So we wanted to throw together just a quick timeline for what is a static water supply, otherwise known as the dry hydrants. And so this shows from the time of the fire starting, 911 being called, us being dispatched, pulling on scene and putting water on the fire. You'll note that we're in the 25 to 30 minute range before water is being put on the fire. It takes an additional 10 to 15 minutes for that second engine to arrive and put hose back to those dry hydrants and supply a viable water supply. By the time that happens, that onboard 650 gallons of water is gone and out, and our crews have to pull out from rescuing potential victims. This timeline shows the difference between a pressurized water supply, where there was a pressurized hydrant within 400 feet of the home. Similar 25 to 30 minute on-scene time due to the location of this particular development, but we don't have that wasted 10 to 15 minutes of connecting to the dry hydrant. We're putting water on the fire, and we're continuing to put water on the fire because we're able to hook that pressurized hydrant.
I want to remind the Board of Appeals that the ordinance adopted by law allows the fire code official to have the authority to interpret the code.
Okay, so these are the two of the reference code sections in our plan review from the International Fire Code, mind you, that reference both the fire flow and then the requirement needing a water supply within 400 feet of the building constructed within this development. So Appendix B, as was referenced earlier, is the applicable table reference to calculate the fire flow requirements. you'll notice the 6,300 square feet actually requires 2,250 gallons per minute. We felt it was nice to give the benefit of a 100 square foot doubt, and so we reduced it to the 4,800 to 6,200 line item, requiring 2,000 gallons a minute. So that's where that 2,000 gallons per minute did come from.
Again, our position is real clear. NFPA 1142 is not applicable. As we heard from one of the township attorneys, there is an adequate and reliable water supply all around you, Lake Michigan and Kalamazoo River. The system would be the dry hydrants. Also, in the appendix, only the fire chief, not the developer or legal counsel, has a right to increase or decrease the fire flow. Reached out to ISO. ISO is an independent company that has an impact on our property protection classifications. Did a conference call with them, spoke with representatives and field supervisors. Their comments were written down due to the size of the buildings. ISO considers those homes the equivalent of commercial buildings and demands. They also indicated the district's property classification in the township may be affected by the lack of an approved water supply within that North Shores development. Interesting comment by ISO. These are not residential structures, they're McMansions. By ISO, they said you're going to need 2,000 to 2,500 gallons per minute, minimum 2,200, because of the size of the homes in the development. Again, NFPA 1142, we as the authority having jurisdiction claim that it does not apply. There is an adequate and reliable water supply, even confirmed by a township attorney. If you want to apply 1142, that's your choice. Feel free to look at the code. 4.1.3, it's up to the AHJ to determine the needs of the fire protection water supplies shall be subject to increase by the authority having jurisdiction based on the items I just went through with you previously.
So, as we've talked about previously, almost 60 developers have installed over 80,000 feet of water main through the tri-communities over the past several years. The one I'm going to talk about in just a second is Dunegrass, where they installed over 5,000 feet at the top of the list here. So it's a similarly situated property. Here's lot 15, and they're just a few miles south where the Dunegrass development is. Again, the developer installed over 5,000 feet of fire service mains. This is just an outlay of the actual water mains themselves. It is important to note in this development, the developer chose to install hydrants within 600 feet of every home, as they installed residential sprinklers in every dwelling. So that changes the measurement from 400 feet to 600 feet, which would be an option for North Shores as well, should they choose to do so. Again, a similarly situated property as referenced in the consent judgment. Calculations are not an exact science. A recent structure fire we had about a month ago in the township, the dwelling was about 5,400 square feet, with only 810 square feet involved when the first engine pulled up. Keep in mind this was 8 minutes in, which is far quicker than we could get to the North Shore development. We were able to use, it took 8,900 gallons of water to extinguish the fire due to the modern construction, synthetic furnishings, and amount of involvement upon pulling up. However, we were able to keep that fire from spreading into the dwelling. There was a hydrant in the front lawn, but the developer's legal counsel seems to think that 9,800 gallons is enough for a 6,300 square foot home. So I'll let you do the math.
I have to challenge the rural claim just because of numbers. I don't know many rural areas that would extend hydrants like we have in our area, over 80,000 feet. I don't know many rural areas that would extend a gas line in the North Shores, a 4-inch gas line, as confirmed by Michigan Gas this morning. Hundreds of thousands of dollars to take that out there when they could use propane. They made a choice. Good for them, I'm glad. Put the natural gas out there. Why not some sort of water main infrastructure? Again, 10,000 feet or thousands of feet of communication lines just for the development. In our opinion, the developer seems to reference rural as a matter to benefit them. Development costs, something to think about. Why should the fire district, taxpayers, fund for fire protection? It seems to me that we have to provide engines, extensive hose lays, and manpower to augment their system. And we do not feel That's our responsibility. It's up to the property owner to develop that infrastructure. He's the one who's going to profit. He needs to do something for the community. There are not any other large-scale developments I can think of that have been built in the last 7 years where we have to provide water tanker shuttles or extend 800, 1,000, or 3,000 feet. They just aren't there. Reached out to Dunegrass, to the builders, the developer's representative. I asked them, how many lots are available? What are the sales going like? They're all sold. Every lot has been transferred over to an owner. Mentioned to him about hydrants and water supply, and his comment was, considering the magnitude of North Shore's development, the investment is easily justified. That's the point we're trying to make in this slide. You have to invest in the community. Dry hydrants in a lake are not an investment.
Hard to believe this was almost 13 years ago, but I remember getting paged out about 8 o'clock at night. This particular site was just 2 miles north of the proposed home on Lot 15. This fire burned for over 12 hours. By the time it was all said and done, burned 3 homes to their foundations and over 50 acres of woods and sand dunes. It took over 100 personnel from 18 departments in both Allegan and Ottawa County, over 1 million gallons of water to extinguish. So these are just a few more photos of what the damage was from that particular fire, and our efforts to extinguish the fire were hindered by no viable fire protection water supply and no viable access roads. So what we're trying to do here today is not set ourselves up for this same failure again in the North Shore development. The consent judgment, as it's been referenced even by the developer's attorney in a recent newspaper article, is that we cannot treat this property any different than similarly situated developments. So why did the Dunegrass, which is similarly situated development, have to install water mains and fire hydrants, but not North Shores of Saugatuck? Again, the consent judgment has no reference whatsoever in here to dry hydrants. All it references is equivalent for emergency water needs.
This slide is very significant to the Board of Appeals. What it is a letter from the developer previous to the current one. It's a letter written in 2012 to the fire department stating that they shall install a new community fire suppression water system to the single-family development supplied by a well, fire pump, which we recommended in 2017, a loop fire protection water main, 400 feet spacing, a backup generator, delivering full fire flows in accordance with IFC. Interesting part is this letter was written 6 months after the consent judgment was signed. The developer, the attorneys, the engineers all decided, let's do this. Legal counsel for the fire district comments, IFC is the code, NFPA are guidelines, not the same thing. Even under NFPA, AHJ is a decision maker based on they decide what the adequate water supply is or not. Hydrant distance is based on IFC, which is the applicable code. Again, this is from your fire district attorney. All the developers' attorneys' arguments presume that NFPA 1142 and not IFC is the code basis, which is not correct. Nothing in the developer attorney's submittal states why hydrants cannot be extended.
So, on November 22nd, myself, Chief Janik, and Lieutenant Bernhardt met with Mr. Boscraft at the site, Lot 15, and discussed our concerns with a viable water supply. He offered to install 2 8-inch hydrants within 400 feet of the proposed dwelling, and then in discussing further lots, offered to install additional sets of dry hydrants every 400 feet down the seawall through the channel of Lake Michigan, and then provide verification that the current concrete bike path along the riverside could support the weight of our apparatus to get to these proposed dry hydrants. What alternatives have they offered? None to our knowledge as of today. But if they were to offer some alternative safety features such as fire suppression systems, we'd be more than willing to consider increasing that 400-foot distance from the hydrant to the proposed dwellings. It is our position that we did not misinterpret the code. There has not been an equivalent method of protection proposed, and the provisions of the IFC do fully apply. Only by following the code can we ensure that we provide the reasonable level of safety for both our personnel and for the public.
Taking all factors into consideration, the fire district has concluded the community of North Shores and its residents are inadequately protected from fire danger. It is our recommendation that the community would be better served by a fire pump, private fire service mains, and hydrants within 400 feet of every dwelling in North Shores, as proposed by Smith Group back in 2012.
So we appreciate your time very much, and your commitment to making sure we're doing our best to protect the citizens and our most valuable asset, our personnel. Thank you.
So now we'll move into presentation from other parties.
Can I have 2 minutes to address a few things that were raised?
No. We'll move into discussion, and if we have questions, we will ask you. Thank you. So if there are other parties who would like to speak, we'll let you speak for 5 minutes each. One at a time. Go ahead.
Don't all rush.
You want my name and everything?
Yes, please.
Doug Dimbliker, Chief of the Grasset Fire Department. I'd just like to say that we are in full support of the fire district's proposal and their, for the pressurized water supply out there. I was in command of the fire up there in Lake Town back in '07. It was tough. It was tough without a water supply. Not saying that we would have saved either of the homes, but I'm sure that if we would have had enough water there, we could have at least saved one. But it was $3 million in damage back in the day, so I'm sure today it'd be a lot more. Appreciate your time, thanks.
Thank you.
Excuse me. Dave Burdick, 385 Fremont in Douglas. I served on the Douglas Planning Commission for 14 years, several years as chairman. I was also on the ZBA. But more relevant to what we're discussing today is for over 20 years I've developed communication programs for the NFPA and the Home Fire Sprinkler Coalition. And I just want to point out some very simple facts about fire. Homes burn whether new or old. There is no difference between the rate of home fires in new construction or in old construction because the vast majority of fires are caused by the action of the people who are in those homes. Candles, cigarettes, kitchen fires, those happen no matter what. Fires are fast. Fires can become deadly in less than 3 minutes. In fact, we're now starting to promote they can become deadly in less than 2 minutes. Within those 3 minutes, you can have flashover, which is when every combustible item in a room, including the air, catches fire. There is no way to survive flashover. In addition, smoke and toxic fumes can kill before people have time to react. Today's fires burn faster and kill quicker. New construction based on lightweight techniques lead to floor failures, lead to faster fire spread, and newer homes are built with newer furnitures and furnishings, most of which are made of plastics that develop toxic fumes when burned. Reduced fire safety is a threat to the entire township. If you were to relax requirements and someone is injured or killed, that will come back to haunt both the township and the 3 communities. In my time on the ZBA, every case that we had to consider, we had 6 or 7 criteria that had to be met. But I broke it down into a general rule of thumb. If something can be adequately solved by writing a check, you don't have a problem. Only the health and safety of the community is of any concern when it comes to appeals. Profitability is not part of the equation. May I approach and pass this out?
Thank you, sir.
It's much easier sitting up.
Thank you.
Are there any other parties who would like to speak?
Hello, my name is Cynthia McKean. I live in the city of Saugatuck, Saugatuck Township Fire District. The issue presented here is not just a spat between the developer and the fire district. Decisions made after the public hearing is closed will affect every person living in this fire district. Following are some questions from those of us who live here that need answering before any kind of changes to our current fire protection can be considered. Number one, what's the current status of the development? I'll give you a copy of this one. Which body will be liable should there be a fire without sufficient fire protection? Should North Shore be able to require the fire department to buy additional equipment? What is the impact on homeowner fire insurance if the development is not designed to International Fire Code standards, IFC? Why hasn't North Shore accepted the need for public water? Did not Dunegrass develop such, well, they did. Dunegrass developed it. How have other developments responded to the fire department's recommendation to maintain its standards with IFC? How is it that North Shore does not have to have a secondary access road given the number of housing units that are included in the development? Do you have all of the requested documentation from North Shore? What could happen if there isn't a sprinkler in the proposed community building? How is the construction of the two new houses at North Shore different from houses built in other developments? What factors in North Shore development might be considered risky to insurers and prospective homeowners? If North Shore succeeds in avoiding IFC standards, will it sign a release of culpability in case of fire? Won't adjacent landowners and homeowners be at greater risk should a fire break out in North Shore? If water is to be suctioned from the river or lake, won't the intake pipes be at risk of blockage? What would be the impact if a pipe were blocked during a fire? What is the impact of adverse weather adaptability in case of a fire if North Shore would succeed with its request? Does our fire department have the equipment needed to fight a fire at North Shore? Do the dry hydrants currently installed at two new single-family beach houses provide minimum fire flow requirements? And I think these all should be responded to before my fire district decides to make some changes, because I think we have an amazing group of people who work here, and they do an amazing job. So thank you. I've got some.
Would anyone else like to speak? Watch the court first.
What do I do? I don't know how to do that.
Pass them around too.
I'll give you some of that. There you go.
Yeah, I was just gonna pass them around.
Hi, my name's Becky Bruns. I'm a resident on the lake shore, and I wasn't going to speak until I heard the presentation by the developer, and I heard Chris's presentation and his reference to the experience of 2007. We had just moved to Lake Town Township in 2005, and at midnight on the night in question in 2007, I'd gone to bed and my husband came in and said, "There's flashing lights down at the end of our driveway." What? I can tell you that that night's experience was scary. As you guys remember, you used our driveway to park your equipment, and you had to ferry water up into that area of Hillside Trail and Spring Beauty Lane. I know the people who lost their houses on Spring Beauty. I know they got out with their pajamas only, and they were cared for at the Gibson Church. That fire took hours and hours to fight, and you had to go to 64th, at the end of 64th and Blue Star to get water. If that wind had changed a few degrees to more westerly wind, we would have lost our house. There would have been many more residences lost and many more acres of public land lost if that fire had changed, if the wind had changed direction and blown that fire from the west. Because it was coming directly from the south, it went along the face of the dune. I'm shocked that the developer would consider risking any life or any land around there in order to save money. And I'm also concerned that the attorney stood here and lectured you about your skills and experience, and I would question what skills and experience the developer or his attorney have in fighting fires. I question whether they will be out there fighting the fire with you, or whether they're content to put their homeowners and firefighters at risk. For whatever reason, the developer and attorney seem to be splitting hairs in order to save money. If you ask me, the location under consideration needs more protection than a city location. There's only one access road, and we know that you don't have the equipment necessary to fight the fire of the size, fire at the size houses that they are presenting. It sounds like the developer would like to privatize the profits and communitize the costs. And I feel, in conclusion, that there should not be a willingness on the part of the developer to risk your reputation as expert firefighters, the lives of their prospective homeowners, and the public land and other residents' land surrounding them. I didn't write this up. If you want me to, I will.
Thank you.
Is anyone else?
David Howard, Chief, Hamilton Fire. There's two things that no one here can change: time and distance. Those are the things that fire officers like myself in any one fire industry have to deal with on any call. I was present on that evening of July in 2007. I was on the front line, even though I'm a chief, manning a hose, trying to protect property. The limiting factor was time and distance. I knew I only had so much time to be there because I was limited by the water supply that was going to be supplying me. The distance was a factor because they couldn't bring more water into me quick enough. At one point we got to the, or I should say not one point, we got to the point where we were running out of water and we had to abandon our position and pull back because we ran out of water and there was no way that we could get water replenished to us. The developer is talking about developing the property on Lake Shore, which is a great looking facility and great property, and I think it's an asset to the community. However, we in the fire service are limited by the time and distance what it's going to take to protect the lives of the people who live there and the property. And again, those are the two things that we can't change. We will do everything in our power to do that, to mitigate that. But here again, remember that when we are responding or when you're making your decision, how can we best deal with the time and distance factor, facilitate what we need to protect the community.
Anyone else? Okay, with that, we'll move into discussion among the board. Eric, why don't we start with you?
Start with me, huh?
Yep.
Well, both sides have some very valid things that I've heard. I understand and try to see both sides of their arguments, trying to understand where they're coming from. I believe in empathy and understanding from a developer standpoint and from the chief standpoint. There's some things, like I said, I agree with North Shore. Sorry, but I do. But there's a lot of other things I agree with the chief on this. I am really torn here, did some due diligence, determining required fire flows. There's 6 different opinions on how much fire flow. We saw chief put one up, you put one up, it's endless. But I'm from the old school, as I'd rather have more than less. My house is going up, I want more than less. The other problem I'm really struggling with is we're talking about one lot, lot 15. I'm not sure what number the next one is going west. If it's 16, I'm guessing, whatever. Are we gonna be back here again? And then 17, are we gonna be back here again? Excuse my French, but this is asinine. Let's do this right the first time and come up with a plan so we can all live by it. So maybe I'm not speaking out of turn talking about the big picture, but we are brought here to talk about lot 15 and how many feet it is from the dry hydrant, and I don't think that's, gonna solve the next issue. So, like I said, I have some things I agree with both sides, but I don't want to come back here at another month when 16's being turned down, and 17 and 18. My personal opinion, I saw it up here, the chief put it in there, why don't we have a pump there all the time with a generator and be ready while we're out there? There's too many things that I believe can go wrong, and I'm not going to give my opinion, but I don't know. I'll just leave it at that, and we'll go from there.
Thank you. Jane?
Well, using the fire apparatus emergency equipment article, there's places in this article that are underlined that are supposed to be brought to our attention, but if you read the whole article, it doesn't really fight your battle like you want it to. I guess my first problem is, as I look at your map, the dry hydrants are in one area, the hose lay would go across the road. The minute the hose lay is laid, the road is useless. So if the fire spreads, anybody that's in the development cannot get out. There's only one way out. So now you have all these people in all these homes, and hopefully the wind's not blowing. But if anybody else wants to get out of that subdivision, one road in, same road out, you can't get in or out. And if you're bringing in tank water, then same problem. You can't get over the hose that's laid in the road. A hose lay is a hose lay.
Across the road.
Excuse me, I'm speaking. Hose lay is a hose lay. So, on my map, it is across the road. So, and even if that one isn't across the road, surely one will be. A hose lay takes a great deal of time to lay. I do know a little bit about this. So, your house is going to burn down before the water gets there. I think that, how many acres is this development? Does anybody know how many acres the development is?
It's just 40 to 44 houses.
Okay, so we have 44 houses. That's hardly rural. I mean, you can say rural is so many people and so many, 44 mansions in a, I don't know how many acre area is not a rural setting. A rural setting is a 2,500 square foot house with no other houses around it. So, I'm sorry, I think if you're gonna do things in a community, do them right the first time. And to piecemeal this fire protection throughout your subdivision, one house at a time, is not doing things correctly. So, you can interpret all you want to, but it does say in this NFPA 1142, the AHD is the person who makes the decision, not the developer or his attorney. So, that's my doing.
Thank you. I think we need to, in my view, keep in mind that the thing that is in front of us is appealing the decision or the statement from the fire district that is in front of us, which requires 8-inch dry hydrants installed in accordance with NFPA 1142. The 2 8-inch dry hydrants should be installed within 400 feet of the proposed structure. So, in my mind, that's what's being appealed that we have to rule on. So, questions around whether or not we should instead require a pressurized system, to me, is not the issue on the table. That's not the decision that's being appealed. I guess overall agree with your concern that I don't understand necessarily why we're considering one lot out of 40, and also conscious that the decision we make today on this one lot sets the precedent for the remaining 40. So if we say, no, it's okay that you can use existing dry hydrants and run that 780 feet, the next house, the same precedent applies, you can now run it 1,000 feet. So where does that end? So I'm conscious about the precedent that we're setting today. I do agree that in reading NFPA, I can agree with the, I guess, assertion that NFPA applies. I think NFPA should be written more clearly than it is, but if I were to read section 111 and 112, I do think that it, in my reading at least, is sort of referring to municipal type water supplies rather than a lake. But I would say even if that applies, and dry hydrants are an acceptable solution, which the fire district says that they are in the decision, NFPA goes on to say that the authority having jurisdiction, meaning the fire district, determines dry hydrant locations and design criteria. And I don't think it's at all unreasonable to require dry hydrants within 400 feet of houses of this size, and with the other criteria in place around, or factors in place around location next to the lake. So, in my view, even applying NFPA, which I think is appropriate, still allows for the district to require locations and certain design criteria for dry hydrants. The question I have, though, is fire flow. So, again, reading the NFPA, dry hydrant systems, according to 833, need to provide a minimum flow of 1,000 gallons per minute. So that's a minimum flow. I guess my question for the fire district is, using your 8-inch stainless steel dry hydrants, do you know what fire flow you get out of that?
So, you want me to answer that now? So, the fire flow at the drafting site could be 1 gallon per minute rating. Farther you move it, you lose friction loss. It's very much like Eric Beckman had equated it to a airline that you run all the way down. The farther you run it, the less pressure and flow you have. So that's why the standard that's nationally recognized limits it to 400 feet. So with both those dry hydrants, we could flow about 1,800 gallons per minute right there. As we pump the water down, not only did it take an engine there, we lost pressure due to friction loss because we're pumping all this volume of water through a 5-inch line. So we created turbulence, which equates to friction loss. So we lost flow and friction as we went down the line. For example, we did a 3,000-foot calculation. We went from 1,860 gallons per minute to 940 at the end. Not enough for a structure fire. And we know from experience, a lot of this is based on the capabilities of the fire department, certainly experience, and past incidents. So we look at 500 gallons per minute at that garage fire, which was a little over 800 square feet. We had 800 gallons per minute flowing, just to try to stop that. It was a deep-seated fire in a void. So to make a statement, why would we do this on the edge? Why do we want minimum requirements? We need more than enough flow. So got into the point where, why are we setting up a pumper, pulling water out, using our engine to supply water to their development, then I have to pump it to an attack pumper. So then I have to lay hose from the pump sucking out, that pump sucking the water out, and move it to the attack engine. So the time delay, that's why you limit it to 400 feet. So you start getting into problems where ISO and nationally recognized standards show type construction, size of the house, 2,000 gallons per minute. So we follow that because we don't want to make up standards. That's why I don't want to apply 1142, nor would I, because I can't fight a fire with 500 gallons per minute. I'm telling you right now, based on experience.
So the next question is for, I think, the developer and his designee. I guess the question is, why are we considering one lot out of 40?
This is the fire district expressed its, I guess, disagreement with the township's decision a while back to enter into consent decree with the previous developer, and has expressed disagreement or opinions on how water should be supplied to this. But that's not what's in front of you. This is not the purview of either the fire district or the Board of Appeals to redo a consent decree that was decided and agreed to between the township and the previous developer. It's also not the purview to talk about developments and compare them and say, we think that you should put in water mains and so forth. That's between the developer and the township with the approval of the planned unit development, which has already occurred. So why we're here on one lot is because that's the site plan we're proposing, is to build a house on one lot. And we send it to the township to get a building permit, and the one item that is holding up construction is the site plan review from the fire district. That's what we're talking about. Does that answer your question?
I guess why is you're building this house now, but you have plans to build 40-some houses. Why aren't you thinking about that as a whole and how to ensure adequate fire supply for the whole rather than one at a time?
We are considering adequate fire supply. That was all brought up. I mean, the structure of this is the township is the one that has the direct authority over the developer and the land within it, okay? They, in certain instances, have delegated some review authority to the fire district. But it's not the fire district and the township both having direct authority. It's the township saying to the district, please look at this for us and tell us what your opinion is, okay? The entire development, what the PUD was approved by the township with an emergency and water suppression, emergency and firefighting layout as part of it. Dry hydrants in it. The township approved that. The township contacted the fire district. The fire district spoke at PUD Planning Commission meetings. And ultimately, the township, who is the direct authority, approved that plan with dry hydrants around the boat basin, with a helicopter landing pad, with a designated parking spot for the fireboat. That's all been approved. So when you say, why aren't we thinking ahead? This was all planned out and approved by the township already a year and a half ago, as far as the layout and where these dry hydrants would be around the boat basin for access, and yes, for large diameter hose lays. I mean, think about this. You're talking about what's going to happen with lots 16 and 17, and if you go towards the lake, it's actually 14, 13,
Okay.
down that way, down towards the pier, okay? That is a Army Corps of Engineers structure, that channel. There is absolutely no way that North Shore will be permitted to run a pipe through a federal government structure. Okay? So this idea of along the channel, let's just pop dry hydrants in every 400 feet. That is impossible. Think through Lake Michigan as well. I mean, you're talking about, I think the discussion is, well, let's put dry hydrants out into the lake where the sand, is sometimes a foot thick, deep, the water's 6 inches deep. That's not workable either. The consent decree does not require municipal water out there, and that's a township issue. That's not a fire district issue. That's not a Board of Appeals issue to say what you think should be out there. It's whether the dry hydrants, which again have already been approved by the township in the PUD layout, whether the fire district can require something other than those going forward.
Are those dry hydrants specifically sized in the approval? Like, does it say 6 inch, 8 inch? Or does it just say dry hydrant?
I don't know the answer to that.
No, it doesn't even say dry hydrants, it says standpipes.
Standpipes.
Right, so they're equating the same thing, we can assume that right now, but no, there isn't a size stated.
So that's in the approved PUD?
In the consent judgment, right?
No, consent judgment.
Not in the consent judgment, in the
In the
approved
PUD.
PUD. Yes,
Does the approved PUD dictate the locations of,
yes.
why don't we have copies of that?
Yeah, why don't we have copies of that?
I don't understand, if you can't put in dry hydrants, and you can't pull water from the river or the lake, and then how do you fight a fire out there? I guess I don't understand. If you're gonna transport water in there, the minute a hard hose line is put in, you can't use the road anymore. So then, and you have to haul water from a source down a one-in, one-out road. It gets very complicated. Then you end up with what you had in 2007, with limited access to water. And why would you want to build a subdivision that has limited access to water? Do you want me to pay $1.5 million for a lot that has no water and has no fire protection? And it doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, I think a lot of the consent judgment thing, there's things we can't do about it, anything about it. It's done. There's one road in, that was approved, that's not gonna change. I mean, I know she asked the question here. That's already been, you know, that's water under the bridge, so to
I
speak.
understand.
But the design of where the standpipes are and if that is in the approved PUD, then we need to see that. Otherwise, we're wasting our time up here, because it'll just be in court anyway. I just wasted an hour and a half of my life for nothing. I'm serious about that. Why don't we have the PUD in front of us telling us what was approved in the consent judgment?
They're gonna tell you it doesn't matter.
Well, it does. It does to me.
The two hydrants right now are temporary dry hydrants because
Right.
the marina hasn't been dug yet, okay? And that, Chair,
Go
not
ahead.
Chairperson, Mrs. Verplank. The hydrants that will be used aren't into the channel and they aren't into Lake Michigan. They're into the marina or into, right now, there's that, where
Yeah.
Broward used to launch their boats.
Okay, but you're
So
building
that's, hold
houses.
on, if I could finish, please. So that's where we can have access to the water, and that's where we can put in dry hydrants. It's my understanding, you can't just take a hydrant, a dry hydrant, and just extend it and say, well, let's just make it longer and have the truck suck water further. It can only be so many feet from where the standing water is. So the hydrants right now are where the launch facility was, and they will be in the boat basin. And hose lays will be for the lots we're talking about along the channel and Lake Michigan, they are all on the same side of the road as the dry hydrants will be, okay? Same side of the road. It's either 4 or 5 houses total right across from the boat basin that will be on the other side of the road only.
Can I ask the fire department about the location? So you're requiring dry hydrants within 400 feet. How do we understand feasibility of that?
It's the same that any other development would be required to follow, where they're within 400 feet of the home, and typically that's obviously a pressurized water supply, but that way we don't have the pressure loss of pumping water 3,000 feet away. As far as what he referenced, that where we were involved in the review at the PUD, I would say that is incorrect. I was actually at the meeting, and as Chief Janik was out of town, we were only involved in whether or not the marina would adversely affect our operations. The PUD had been approved before we were ever asked to comment. So as far as the PUD goes, we were not involved and could not explain why the dry hydrants were placed, if and where they are, and what's even in the PUD, or what was approved by the township. I would also ask the question that if that's true and this has already been approved in the PUD, then why don't they already have a building permit, and why are they waiting for us to continue? Obviously, there is some fire district input in a viable fire protection water supply, because the township relied on us to do that, versus letting planning commissioners that don't fight fire approve a water supply. And one last comment I'd like to offer was just that it was the comment about not being able to put dry hydrants in a navigable waterway by the Army Corps of Engineers was actually brought up by Chief Janik to Mr. Boscraft at our meeting in November, and he said that wasn't an issue because they own the property and already won that lawsuit with the Army Corps. So it was, I found
That was not our idea.
right.
Well, they don't own the channel,
Right.
they don't own the lake, so that's
So- We never approved the water supply for that development, period. We were never consulted. We didn't do it. You had people involved in it that don't know water supplies. That's real evidence from the presentation. They don't know what to call it. They don't know what it's capable of. We recommended if you're gonna choose a dry hydrant, put in 8, we get 6. We get the cut sheet for that after it's installed. So if our opinion doesn't mean anything, as Eric said, why are we here? Go ahead and just do what you want. And I don't think that's what everybody wants here, not in this room. What we want to do is work this out together. In this conversation we've had since 2017, we can't flow enough water. Why do we want to be on the edge of minimum water supplies when we're talking about people, human life? And I am unwilling to take those risks. I won't do it. I will not approve that.
I don't understand why a developer would stick their neck out having the bare minimum of safety protection for their people. It's, you know, assess them. Put a system in and assess them. Raise the price of the lots. I don't understand it. I know the guy who did dune grass, and he did it right. And just to bring that up, it is a similar type development that's said in the consent judgment. It said, but I understand, you guys wanted to run municipal water. I do remember you hearing you guys say that, and I appreciate that. It just was not feasible.
So do you guys think we have enough information, or where would you like to take it?
Well, I don't want to rule on it today. I want to look all this over and do it later.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that are unanswered still. I'd like to see the PUD.
Yeah, I would too.
I definitely would. I also physically would like to see, and I have saw, railroad out there, and when I was with Scott one time and saw the pipes, but physically don't know how far away that lot is. I don't know if it's feasible, if we have CM pipes and that's approved, to expect hydrants every 400 feet. We don't have them on Daniel Drive, and we don't have them on Oneka or Orman Trail. I mean, those are some situations in the township that were done way back when, and they weren't done right again. God forbid something happens on those roads. I have a family member on one of them, and so does the chief, so I guess we can't go back and change what's been approved, but we can look at what was approved and see if we can make it the best system that was approved. So I'm not ready to make a decision one way or the other. I'm still understanding water flow and everything else. It's not my specialty, but I'm learning.
So I guess two questions there I heard. One is, can we get the approved PUD and have time to review that before we make a decision? And second, do we need a site plan, an on-site visit?
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. I like to see what I'm talking about. And I guess, just from a prospective buyer point of view, why wouldn't you want to provide your buyers the best possible protection? Why wouldn't you want to sprinkle those houses? It's obvious it's going to take the fire department a long time to get there. To sprinkle a house costs $3,000 to $5,000. I can't imagine if you paid $1.5 million for a lot, you would even think about sprinkling your house, not think about sprinkling your house, or having an adequate water supply. I guess I'm clueless. I don't even know how you'd sell lots with no fire protection if one knew about that, and whose liability is that if there is no fire protection? If the fire department has clearly said, we can't get there in the allotted time that it would take to put a fire out, there's no sprinklers, why would you want to build that? I don't understand. So maybe it's not mine to understand, but I guess I just don't understand why you wouldn't want to give prospective buyers the best possible options, especially when you're charging them that much money. Why don't you want to build a first-class subdivision? So yes, I'd like an on-site visit, and I want to look at the fire flow problems.
I would like to schedule that as a public meeting. Otherwise, it really limits what we can talk about there. So now comes the hard part of how do we schedule that. As well as the next hearing. I don't know, is that something we could actually do at the same time, or?
Well, it's up to the owners if they want to.
Well, we as, us three, why couldn't we go out there and you just can't discuss anything.
We can look.
Who would
You
we
can
go out-
look,
Who would we go out there with?
I don't know, just take pictures and notes and not say a word. Talk about the weather.
Each other.
I think that's hard to do in practice. Knowing this group, anything.
Knowing our work schedules.
I guess first question is to developer, is that something that you would allow, is a site visit?
Yeah, we can do a site visit. We're not having a public meeting out there, but we'll have a site visit. If all three of you want to come in separate cars, you can follow me in.
I think that makes sense, and like you said, as long as we don't make any decisions and discuss the situation, I don't see we're against the freedom or whatever meeting, Open Meetings Act.
As long as we're careful about that.
And do we want to bring the fire chief with us?
Well, then that escalates my concern, because then we have one side saying their point of
Mhm.
view, the other side saying their point of view.
Well, if they both were there and we have questions as individuals, not asking you, but asking you questions, or, well, I guess we could take notes and ask them later. Because I think the dry hydrants are obvious where they are. I know where they are.
Okay, so why don't we set a time for a site visit? It would be helpful to see both points of view, but we can't allow conversation and discussion and question and give and take unless we make it a public meeting. As long as that's clear, we can set that. We can set that visual. And then we'll also need the next hearing, so I guess we'll need to find two times. So, is that something we could look at calendars now?
Might as well.
Maybe the 17th for the second hearing would be, maybe do it before the regular board meeting, because you guys would all be here anyway, if that might work, at like 2 o'clock possibly, instead of, and then we'd go right into the fire board meeting afterwards.
Just a suggestion, to keep things fresh in your mind, why not one day, drive through there, come immediately back here for your second meeting?
I personally would be okay with that.
Yeah, me too.
I'd rather get it all done in one day.
Yeah.
So what day is that?
The 17th would be the next board meeting, so that's like,
Mondays and Fridays are always better for me, but that would be a Monday, right?
Yeah.
February 17th. I may be out of town that day.
I'd also rather not stack it with the board fire board
Yeah.
meeting and then
Yeah.
the
You
city
have a
council meeting
council
after that.
oh, okay. Maybe the,
I will be out of town the 14th also.
If we did it on the 3rd, I don't think anybody has a council meeting that way. That mine are you have a council meeting that day, don't
I
you?
do,
yeah,
yeah.
and the 10th
And
would
mine
be
is
the
the
city
10th
side.
and the 24th.
Can we do a Tuesday,
Depends which one.
the 4th?
Yeah. I can do that.
I think
I will be here.
Can we do a site visit at 3:30? Does that work?
Okay.
Good for me.
Meet you at the gate at 3:30.
Okay. Followed by meeting at 4:30. Is an hour enough time? Okay.
February 4th, is that?
February 4th, yeah.
3:30 on site.
3:30 on site, hearing at 4:30.
Okay.
Who could supply us with the copy of the Griffin?
With the,
Griffin can do that.
The PUD, copy of the PUD, that Griffin?
We can try to find it.
yeah, we're gonna.
Because it's probably at the, even if it's at the township and we stop there at different times, and
Right.
we may not need a copy, but depending on what kind of
I have another appointment I have to go to that I can't get out of, but, at 3:30, I'll see you there.
Yep,
All right.
thanks, Scott.
Okay, so, actually, we're doing a little bit out of order, so let's have a voice vote to close the hearing.
I make a motion that we close the public hearing.
I support.
Okay, any discussion on that? All those in favor of closing the hearing?
Yes.
Yes.
No one's opposed? Okay, action by the board, so we will set the, do we need a motion for that?
Yeah, I think you have to motion to table it until the next date, was how you did it last time.
Okay.
I move we table any decision-making to February 4th with a site visit at 3:30 and then discussion at 4:30.
I'll support. I'm sorry, I was putting it in my calendar.
And the site visit is not a public meeting, right?
No.
No, site visit is not.
Okay, 4:30, public meeting to resume consideration. Do you have a second? You said.
No, I'll second, yeah.
Okay. Any other discussion on that?
Well, what did I say, Chris?
Motion by Erling, second by Beckman to table any decision-making until 2/4/2020 at, with a site visit at 3:30 PM and a public meeting at 4:30 PM.
Do we want to say decision-making, or do we want to say any further action? Because we may not make a decision
Right.
at that point either.
Yeah.
Well, it was just a table until it was the last one.
I'll table any further action until,
So the public meeting at 04.
yeah.
Okay. All those in favor of that motion, say yes.
Yes.
Okay. So now we'll open it up again for public comments. Please limit your time to 3 minutes. Anyone else with a public comment?
Becky Bruns, Lake Shore resident. Thank you for your help in 2007. I would hope nobody has to go through that. I just want to say that I forgot to mention when I spoke earlier that, and somebody said something about precedent, which made me think of this, that if North Shore prevails on Lot 15, it is reasonable, and they've proven in past, our experience, to assume that they will use the decision as precedent. And they will take it as precedent and reason not to use it on other lots. And I completely support your question about why is this being piecemealed? And why is there not a planned first-class fire suppression for this entire development and not one lot at a time? I'm shocked that the two houses that are the McMansions that were already built have not got approved fire systems. And that gives me the same concern as any building along the lake shore should a fire occur. And lastly, I would ask you to consider the feelings and the lives of the people in this room who are going to be called to fight the fire, and wonder if any one of these firefighters wants to be responsible for fighting a fire at that development. My guess is they would not. And lastly, I would say, on the attorney's comments about the township's not the one who fights the fires. The township people are not going to be out there holding the hoses. Thank you for your service in 2007. Thank you.
Any other public comments?
Can I do it here?
Sure.
We're the subject matter experts. Not the township, not the attorney, not the developer. If you don't trust us enough to make educated, informed decisions, you have the wrong people here. I'm going to support all my guys and all my girls in the fire service. This development does not serve the community well. They can do this. They can do this. And I really am hopeful they may have second thoughts and say, let's just do the right thing here. I haven't given up on the developer. And I really hope the decisions you make are going to influence decisions for the next 100 years. You might as well take the water supply code and throw it right out, just eliminate it on this. Because the reality is, it's gonna be embellished, it's gonna be used, plagiarized, you will be setting a precedent. So this is a big decision for you to make. But I still believe, perhaps they'll give it some thought, and say, you know what, all right, let's look at this pressurized water system again, okay? Do the right thing for the community, make the investment. We're as price sensitive as the next guy. When you look at the magnitude of this development, clearly, it's a step up, the price of the lots. So all we ask, consider this. It can be engineered, it can be done, do the right thing.
Yeah, still public comment?
Do we get a chance to talk again?
Yeah.
Oh.
Cynthia McKean. My question is, we don't know there's a marina. What happens if there's not going to be a marina? Everything here's talking about the marina, the marina with the marina. The marina has big-time problems. What was originally approved had 20 items. It was a preliminary approval that the developer was supposed to take care of. So don't think so small. If Lot 15 is built and there's no marina, are you going to pay $1 million for a lot if there's no marina? And they're not. I haven't heard one word about global warming. The lake is higher than we've ever seen it. Stuff's falling into the lake. I took a trip down the lake yesterday. Look at the house, where the house fell in, where the house is going to fall in. And they're in the bottom of the, you come out the river and there's this muck hole now, and they're going to build in that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is Richard Kirk. I'd like to thank you twice for allowing me to speak, because I'll say to you, I'm not a Michigan resident, I'm an Illinois resident, but I've been coming out to this community off and on for over 40 years. A friend of family that lives out here, and I'm thinking about moving out here myself now, so I'm beginning to involve myself in things like this. My understanding is that your standard of decision on the appeal is whether or not the Fire District Authority misinterpreted the law, misinterpreted the rules. From everything I've heard from both the Fire District and counsel for the developer is that they did not, because of all the ordinances, the guidelines, the internationally accepted codes. It is ultimately their call on what is adequate and what is not adequate. And what is adequate is different than what is minimal. It struck me as the discussion was going on here that the White Star Line, the builders of the Titanic, exceeded the safety requirements of the day. They were very proud, they promoted that ship, they patted themselves on the back that they had exceeded the requirements for safety for a ship of that size. Their problem was nobody thought about what if something happens with the design that we have in using it the way that we're going to use it. These gentlemen have thought about the what ifs on this Lot 15. And I have not heard myself anything that shows that they have misapplied the applicable laws here. As I've said, that seems to be the standard for your decision. So thank you very much for allowing me to make these comments. I'm proud to do it, and I truly am looking at moving out here, and I like to see, I like what I've seen today for this community. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Okay, we'll move into Board of Appeal member comments. Jane, we'll start with you.
So, what the decision is if the fire department oversteps their jurisdiction in this matter. I'm like Eric, I want more protection rather than the minimum we can get by with this. I want to see those 20 steps that were supposed to take place before a marina was dug. The marina hasn't been dug. Cynthia, you're correct. There is no marina, so that whole scheme of how to fight a fire that's just a maybe. I don't like to base things on maybes. I want concrete. I don't want to see this fire department lose members because maybes didn't work. This is fire you're talking about. You're talking about buildings that burn down in 3 minutes. We watch it over and over and over again with our sprinkler demonstrations. There's toxic chemicals in the air. You have to crawl on the ground to get out of a house that's on fire. I want to see the best for the community, not the, this is good enough. It's not good enough. So I think we need to really look at this from 100 different ways. I'm not impressed with what I've seen today.
Eric?
We've been asked if the NFPA 1142 should apply or if the IFC should apply. That's our job as the appeals board. We've also been asked if existing dry hydrants are capable of fighting fires the way they are presented. Without talking about the marina, because that had nothing to do with the consent judgment, there obviously is a PUD approved in place that we haven't seen. And shame on the people out there that didn't bring it to us. We need to see that, or we're just going to be back in court. As a township representative, I take what Greg says to heart, what he just talked about. I would recommend you writing a letter to Mr. Padnos, bypassing these guys and say, Mr. Padnos, this is going to cost X number of dollars extra to have this development with the right safety fire protection. I agree with that. If I was buying a house, I would want that system out there. I give these guys credit. They tried to run municipal water. They tried to do the right thing. They have found aquifers out there that they could use, I believe. I'm not an expert at that, but I just don't know, and I need to do more homework on, if the NFPA should apply or the IFC, and how the dry hydrants would work that are proposed.
I just want to reiterate what I said at the beginning, that I think our scope is whether or not the fire district correctly interpreted the code.
Right.
It is not to answer whether or not there should be a pressurized water system. Certainly the developer could decide to do that, but it's not, as far as I understand, our scope to require that. Our scope is to look at the decision that was made and evaluate whether that is appropriate given NFPA and or IFC. I got that right, NFPA. Sorry.
Close enough.
Close. So I don't have anything other to say. We'll reconvene on February 4th. And in the meantime, I think we'll rely on the township to supply the approved PUD. Okay. So with that, we will adjourn. We need to vote, do we? Just that.